Morning.
Morning. How you doing?
Okay, where's the band?
Yeah, the band. I got a bit fed up with the band. They got a bit fed up with each other, to be honest. And I said to them, look, if you're really fed up about lockdown and stuff, and you've been, well, at least you brought the dog in.
Yeah, clickety-click toenails.
Huh? Clickety-click. Yeah, so anyway, the band said to me they were pretty fed up with the whole thing. And I just said to them, why don't you just go and, do a virtual holiday somewhere? And it didn't take long to actually turn around and say, yes, I'll jump at that. So they all did, and that's why they're not here. I don't know where they've gone, but they said they'd send me something. So, we'll just see what happens.
Oh, I did pick something up from the letterbox.
Oh, right, was it? Oh, it looks like a CD. Okay. All right, let's put it in and see what they've done.
Living on an island, I up and left my job in New York. Oh, I'm feeling, well, kinda happy. Well, nobody can criticize the way that I talk, and I'm moving forward in my own. Till my lady comes around, she brightens up my day. And now I go to sleep and dream my happy dream about another tree lady. Oh, yeah. But for now I go to sleep and dream my happy dream about another tree lady.
Well, at least they've been doing something. What do you think?
Hate it.
Okay, I suppose we've got to do some work, some proper work. Let's get back to the job in hand.
We had a really great time interviewing Treeconomics. We spoke to Keith Saker, Kenton Rogers,
Danny Hill and Victoria Tate.
and one of their clients, Matthew Tomsett from Kia, who's responsible for highway trees. It really shows how useful these suite of tools are. We're going to hear all about the different types of tools, how they're used, and when it makes a difference on the ground.
And they're getting the general public involved, I think, aren't they?
Well, I really love that. We hear from Victoria Tate how students in lockdown got involved with gathering data and how it really helped their mental health and their learning. So it's a win-win situation.
Okay, well, I think we'll play this section out with another little bit of whatever the boys have done over in New Orleans. I guess they're in New Orleans. And then we'll get into the episode, shall we?
Sounds great.
We'll see you at the other end.
Hello, this is Tree Lady Talks, and I'm Sharon Durdant-Hollenby. All music and production is by Noel Durdant-Hollenby, and all views expressed by me or the interviewees are entirely personal. Welcome to Keith Saker, founder and director of Treeconomics. Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Sharon.
So Keith, how did this all begin for you?
How did it all begin? Well, there's a long story. About, must be 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, Kenton and I didn't know each other at all. And we both were party to Matthew Wells coming over to the UK to speak about iTree and iTree's uses in New York. Now, there were two particular statistics he came out with, was that for every dollar that was invested in New York street tree population, there were $5 of returns for the community and the city itself. And we heard Matthew Wells speak, and again, we hadn't met. And Kenton applied to Davey, who did the training on iTree in the US, and was taking a team across to the US for training. I saw this in the Horticulture Week. So I phoned Kenton up and said, Kenton, can I come with you? And he said no.
Oh.
Basically, because we didn't know each other. And it was like, oh, are you trying to cash in on my initiative? So I then persuaded the management team at Bartram to invest in bringing Davey across to the UK. So while Kenton was being trained in your iTree and the uses of, we were being trained at Barcham in the uses of iTree, and the training was very similar. It was about the groundwork. I was then on the steering group for Tor Bay, but it was distance. Kenton and I still hadn't met. But increasingly, we became aware that we were going on to similar programs and speaking about exactly the same thing. And we finally met at a conference. I think it was an AA conference in Manchester. And we started chatting. And Kenton had already had the brand Treeconomics, but then he invited me to actually join Treeconomics and work alongside him. So it all started out of rejection, really. And from that point onwards, we've been working together fairly consistently. Me as very much the sleeping partner and the non-technical expert, but a person with a public profile who is able to talk about and enthuse over the uses of iTree and other valuation systems.
And Kenton's too modest to say, but Treeconomics has grown from strength to strength, hasn't it, in terms of the number of staff you have, the number of projects you carry out, and perhaps you can just give us a flavour of how it operates.
Well, I mean, Treeconomics is Kenton's vision. Kenton's the pathfinder. Kenton will be recognised sometime in the future as one of the lead innovators who was actually ready to endorse and support a methodology that the UK wasn't actually ready for when he first started promoting it. And over time, we've done more local authority projects, we've done more private projects with developers and folks. And yes, it has grown, and we've now got two full-time technicians, executives. I'm not quite sure what their title is. A very healthy and well-run board, and it was all too early. Our first going to market was going to a market that wasn't ready for it, and now the market has turned with the focus on trees and needing to understand what trees deliver for us in a far more scientific and evidential way.
I can say that the market is now very ready for it on a smaller scale than just the local authority or town or even regional scale. The market is really ready for it in terms of development sites.
I agree.
What's your vision really for Treeconomics and the use of iTree?
It's twofold. First of all, we have Treeconomics, the business, which is a social enterprise, and Treeconomics, the deliverer of social good. And it's a balance the whole time, because both for Kent and I share a belief that the only way we're going to actually arrive at the point where urban forests are being managed sustainably with an understanding of the public goods delivered, what's delivered, what's possible, what isn't possible. So we share this view, and I think that's the thing that's kept us together all this time, in that we do believe that the ultimate vision for Treeconomics is to have ever is a bit grand, but as many urban forests in the UK being managed in a sustainable fashion, but with an understanding of what's entailed in that management, the vision for an urban forest, what can it deliver, how can it deliver it, what are the priorities within that urban forest management, and the development of strategies to get there. And strategy is like the second part of having the urban forest management plan. So the creation of a vision, an understanding of what we have now, its limitations, its strengths, its weaknesses, and then how you can develop strategies to actually make improvements in that urban forest. So not only is it sustainable, but develops, and then how people are going to be the beneficiaries of that urban forest management.
One of the things you've said there is how people are going to be the beneficiaries of that urban forest management. One of the things I really like about the iTree Eco Studies is the ORVAL tool, that's the ORVAL tool, that correlation with areas of deprivation and socio-economic factors, and how, almost like a heat map, to use a simple phrase of where there are gaps in the canopy cover and how that correlates with social need, and just trying to meet that green equity. And I know, for example, in Islington Council, that's just one that I know, and how that is being actually used to target new planting where it's going to deliver real societal benefits as well. One of the things I talked about with Kenton was how the study is actually carried out and the fact that you use volunteers. I wonder if you have any understanding or have measured, or even anecdotally, how working as a volunteer has sort of touched people's lives.
We've only got the comments of volunteers post studies, really, and the comments they make to you during training and participation in the study. So I'll give you two examples. When we were doing the London Eye Tree, I was doing the training up in London. Kenton and I alternated. So 1 week I would do the training, another week Kenton would do the training. And I drew the short straw or the long straw, whichever way you want it. But who turned up as a volunteer was Sir Harry Studholme. Sir Harry at the time was head of the Forestry Commission. He came along as an ordinary volunteer, never announced to anybody who he was. Obviously, I knew, but the rest of the group didn't. And he just participated in the training and had a lovely day, really enjoyed it, but came over afterwards and said, I really learnt a great deal today, so thank you. So that's Harry. But then if you take it down to the other end of the spectrum, when we were doing iTree here in Lewes, which is where I live, it was a small community group. It was a friends group. And we obviously couldn't afford consultants to do the field work. So we approached a local agricultural college who run an urban forestry course. And the students, as part of their mensuration program, undertook to do the field work on the iTree study. Those students also not only had an understanding of the urban forest, but were out in the community talking to people. And they worked on a series of suggested management plans following the study, and it worked really well. But again, I did the training for those students and did some of the fieldwork collection, and their engagement and commitment was wonderful. And I think the largest part of it, Sharon, is when you do the eco study, you have to go on public and private land. So you're going into people's back gardens. The resistance or refusal rate is extraordinarily small as a percentage. I'm not sure what, but it's less than 5%. And the engagement there, when you're actually on site in somebody's garden, explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. And again, the positive engagement. So it's like on several strands. It's not only the volunteers themselves, but who the volunteers are communicating with. And then when the information's available, how that information is then trawled down into the community. I mean, even now in Lewes, while the study itself never went any further, there's a really healthy, active tree planting group who are part of the Friends of Lewes group, who are now applying for grant money to do more extensive planting in Lewes. So again, I've been part of that group and actually been out and believe it or not, got my hands dirty and actually planted some trees rather than talking about them. But then you're meeting all sorts of people from different parts of the community. So it has a knock-on effect.
Yeah, that's what I thought it probably would do. So it's not just about science, it's about people as well. But going back to the science, so I understand that at least 30 major studies have been carried out in the UK. What has been the approach of the recipients of those studies? I'm thinking particularly of local authorities. Do you know how they've used that data?
Sadly, in many instances, not at all. In some instances, some, and in some instances, a great deal. So Torbay, for instance, the tree manager there, after the Torbay study, found himself raised up the hierarchy. His profile was huge after that and generated more money for tree plant and tree management. you're aware of the John Ryan case at Islington, where John is busy using iTree to build up the platform for his urban forestry program. And you're quite right, it's layered, and it's layered down using other social deprivation indicators as to where planting is going to be most effective, which species might be used to deliver maximum benefits. And I think the one area that I won't say disappointed, but I don't think it's been maximised, is that I've always looked upon local authority tree managers as custodians of the public urban forest estate. Those local authority tree managers are brilliant in the job that they do, in my view, under-resourced, pressurised, trying to manage proactively in a very reactive environment. One of the things we have found is with the iTree we've done on local authority inventories, this is the publicly owned trees, we start to build a case for how important these tree officers actually are and the value of the asset they're managing, both now and into the future. And it's looking at that situation and being able to say, well, they might only be managing 40, 50% of the total tree stock in any given area, but invariably they're managing the high profile trees, the trees that are delivering maximum benefits, the trees that the public can see. And the values are staggering. I've got a piece to write, so I can't see it. The value's staggering when you just look at it and you think, which other asset would be so valuable yet so underfunded? I mean, there was a figure that came out from the National Register of Asset Managers who recommended that anything between 0.5 and 1.5% of the total asset value should be reinvested every year in the maintenance of that asset. If we take the London Borough of Southwark, for instance, the asset value, caveat valuation, is 262.9 million. The replacement cost is 165 million. But if you actually then extrapolate that to any other publicly owned asset, you can see that these tree officers are actually managing probably what is the local authority's actual most valuable asset. That's just an asset value in terms of replacement cost or caveat. That doesn't account for the benefits that are delivered each year, annually, and the carbon stored during the lifetime of a tree. So the value of what they're managing is actually far, far greater even than those capital asset values. And what I suppose disappoints is that more haven't converted their inventories into iTree or equivalent studies. We could build up the case for tree officers as a group, but secondly, we could have an accurate picture of the publicly owned urban estate in the UK. And I think that's sadly missing because you have things like the English tree strategy and others, and the evidence base for the starting point for the vision is actually there in the operational inventories of the local authorities. And we could build up a picture of the public asset in the UK, or certainly England, very quickly, very economically. And so there's two strands to that. It's understanding what we've got now across the UK in our cities, and also the building up of the profile of tree officers, what they actually do for us. And rather than being like the whipping boy, there's not, the leaves are in my gutter, even that doesn't take account in terms of what they do in terms of tree preservation. Because again, the trees managed under the TPO legislation are invariably the larger, better trees that are delivering greater benefits. So the whole TPO system is delivering as well. And that doesn't go into those calculations because they're privately owned trees invariably.
I mean, I think that the iTree studies, if we look at two elements of the data that come out of that, and that's carbon storage and carbon sequestration. Mm-hmm. These are phrases that are being picked up all the time by the general public, people who are very concerned about trees, let's call them pressure groups for want of a better phrase, and politicians locally. And local authorities are producing carbon net zero targets, everybody is. And this is really, really a time to sort of sell the idea of having a detailed tree inventory now more than ever. And I wonder what we can do as an industry to really break through the barrier, because there are barriers towards, say, an iTree study being carried out. And some local authorities don't even have a full tree inventory by any form.
I know.
That I do know. So the picture is so patchy, and I wonder what we can do. I'm just musing, really, to really bring some uniformity across the United Kingdom, and so that we can really enable local authorities, for number one, to manage their trees properly. That's really, really important. And number two, to support the officers who are trying to deliver what is a really difficult job.
Yeah, I mean, I can't add to that, Sharon. I mean, how you break through, I mean, understanding and leadership at government level would be helpful. Government listening to the people that actually do understand it. I mean, for instance, at this moment in time, we have got this preoccupation with the numbers game. We're going to plant X amount of trees in the next 5 years, and we're going to increase canopy by 10%. No, you're not. It's an impossibility. It's a planned progression over time, and you're going to get a dip in canopy before you actually see the advantage of climate tree planting. What numbers don't actually take into account is where, what species for maximum benefit, management and maintenance, population bubbles. I remember a conversation with Dave Noack many years ago now, and he said tree planting programs are great, but what they do is they create population bubbles. So you get a 2-year, 3-year period where huge numbers of trees are planted, and then there's a lapse. So what you've got is you've got all these trees who are coming forward. And it's very evident in our new towns, Milton Keynes, Basildon, to name two, where you have a mass planting through a short period of time. And now you have a population that's reaching maturity at the same time. And invariably, they were fast-growing trees for immediate effect, as opposed to a mixture and a diversity within that population. And of course, you know, if we're talking about sustainable urban forest management, then there has to be diversity within that population, diversity of age class, diversity of species, diversity of location. So there are all elements in genetic diversity, of course, but all that has to be programmed and planned. And one of I think the real benefits of iTree and the work that Treeconomics says, it provides the baseline. Just finished reading one of Dieter Helm's books where he talks about the economic management of the environment and some of the things. All the time he talks about baseline data. Where are we now? What have we got? And then comes the where do we want to be, the aspiration, the vision, and then the methodology. Okay, we have a vision, we know where we are now. How do we get there? What are the priorities? What are the most valuable interventions at what time? So that may not be tree planting. For instance, we did one study where the population was really heavily skewed towards younger trees. There were very few mature aging trees in the population, very few large trees. So the priority in terms of strategizing that would have been, okay, we divert resources into conserving those large trees for as long as we possibly can. So it seems a priority would have been, how do we put increased management into retaining those trees while our younger trees actually begin to grow and mature? So, you know, it's not all about tree planting. There are many other facets to the management. You know, say environmental inequity, Sharon. I mean, that's a real issue. It's a fact in London, believe it or not, that if you are south of the Thames, in all the boroughs, the most southerly area of the boroughs are invariably have larger tree populations than the northern.
But I wonder if it's the other way around, north of the river, is it?
It is.
Yeah, I can imagine that from just being around London all the time.
And it seems to be mirrored east and west as well. So the further away from the centre you go, the greater the tree cover. Yet the greatest need is in those areas where there is environmental inequity and parts. I mean, at Southwark, they've done some wonderful work in planting the urban areas, but you still can't compare Bermondsey to Dulwich. So why should the folks in Bermondsey have lower tree cover than the folks in Dulwich?
I just think this is such an important study, and I urge anybody who's listening to this who works in a local authority to think about having an iTree study, to contact their manager about it, because when you've got that evidence baseline, it really does empower you to sort of say, well, this is what we've got, this is what we need to do, I need a bigger budget. And some people might be thinking, dream on, but actually it's working for some local authorities, isn't it?
It's undoubtedly. And it elevates the tree manager, the arboriculturist, from being, it's just the gardener. And that's, it's that position in the hierarchy. And undoubtedly, in my view anyway, this background information, this baseline information, does enable that profile to be raised, because suddenly the asset that's being managed is articulated in a way that is readily understandable.
Yes, it is, definitely. What's your dream scenario?
Trees in Towns 3 based on our iTree.
Kenton Rogers.
Kenton, just for those who don't know you, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, I'm CEO and co-founder of Treeconomics. So the other co-founder is Keith Saker. And originally my background was in more traditional forestry. After leaving school, I worked for Forest Research and the Duke of Wellington's estate. And I did a diploma in forest management. And then found myself working more and more in the urban realm, where trees meet people. And more recently doing an MSc in forest ecosystem management. And that was focusing on the urban forest.
So tell us about your first study.
So Treeconomics essentially was set up on the back of our first iTree Eco project, where we looked at trees as assets rather than liabilities. And it was the first time it had been done in the UK, looking at trees in this way and looking at the entire urban forest as well. So I was fortunate enough to go to the World Forestry Congress, where I'd heard a talk by a gentleman called John McNeil, and he was from Canada, and he did a talk called Our Solution to Our Pollution. And it really was a different take. Rather than managing trees as I was used to as a consultant at that time, looking at trees in the context of hazard and risk and is my tree safe, that kind of thing. This was looking at trees and valuing what they did for society, which at that time was the carbon storage and sequestration and the air pollution that they filtered from the atmosphere. So trees are really good at doing that. They capture the pollutants on the fine hairs, on their leaves, and on their bark as well. I got back to the UK after that conference and then tried to look for someone who would be willing to do this in the UK. The tool we used was called iTree Eco, and we had no idea if it would work. We had no idea if it would provide meaningful results. And so we got a group together. Once I'd found a local authority that was up for it, which was Torbay and Neil Coysh, who was the then tree officer at Torbay. We wanted to find others to work with. So we worked with Natural England and Forest Research and Torbay Council and others to sort of put a steering group together, really, because we wanted to make sure this wasn't sort of like the Betamax and that there wasn't something else out there. And actually there wasn't. So we trialled it in Torbay over the course of 2 years.
Well, to take the listener through the process, explain a little bit about what iTree is and how then you gather the data to put it through the programme.
iTree is a suite of tools. There's lots of different tools within the iTree suite. So sometimes you'll hear people talking about iTree when they mean iTree Eco or maybe iTree Canopy, but there are others and an ever-growing number. There's iTree Landscape, iTree Species. The main two that work in the UK are iTree Eco, and that was the one we trialled in Torbay, and the other one is iTree Canopy. And essentially they're tools to look at measuring and managing the urban forest resource. And by the urban forest, we mean the trees and shrubs across the entire urban fabric. So that's street trees and woodlands, trees on public property, but also trees on private property or institutional land, or those that are owned by the highways or the Network Rail, as it were. So it really is everything that gets measured. It relies on you taking measurements of an individual tree or a number of trees. So it's scalable from that individual tree level to a street, to a neighbourhood, to a park or large estate, right the way up through to a large urban forest.
With the Torbay project, am I correct in thinking that you did sample plots rather than every single tree in the borough, because you'd be driven mad? And also, you can't go and measure somebody's tree in private ownership without their permission. So tell us about this sort of sample plotting and how many you might do, say, for a local authority, and how do you determine when those plots might be?
Okay, so yeah, you're quite right. You cannot measure all the trees in Torbay. So the sampling approach is used, whereby you collect your sample and then extrapolate that over the whole larger area. And iTree can do that. Or if you've got a more discrete tree population, you can look at individual trees. We gridded Torbay up into 250 squares and then randomly allocated a plot in each one of those squares. Each of those are a tenth of an acre, or 0.004 hectares in size, but you can modify that. You can have plots as large or as small as you wish, but obviously you want to try and have a large enough plot to get you a good sample, but not too large that it becomes too expensive to even do. Because they're random, those plots will fall in public and private property. We did letter drops to those that were on private property, so people were aware we were coming. And that's an approach that's been followed on since with projects in sort of London and Oxford and Wales that have been done by ourselves and others. When we did that pilot, we thought, oh, this is going to be a problem. No one's going to want us on our property. But actually, it's the reverse that's true. Once people realise you're not there to do the drains or the roof, then it's sometimes difficult to get away when you explain you're doing a tree survey, and then you get dear old ladies, wanting you to show you their rose bushes and have you got any gardening tips? And it can be difficult to get away, which is great. And so in Torbay, there was 8 plots, I think, that we couldn't access. One of those was because they thought we were sort of clandestinely getting council tax data, and the other was an individual who'd had an altercation with the council because he'd cut down some trees to get a sea view. And the others were things like steep quarry slopes. There was one in the lion pen at Paignton Zoo.
That's some risk assessment.
Yeah. So those ones we were left out. But where possible, you can estimate that as long as you make a note of it on the iTree program. And all that tree data that you collect, and land use data, and ground cover data, and shrub data, there's over sort of 30 bits of individual information you collect on the trees, the relationship of the trees to the building, and that's all put into the computer model. And that tree data then is matched up with hourly pollution data for that area and hourly meteorological data, and a database that contains all the sort of climate zone information and albedo effect, which is how the sun reflects off surfaces. So it's quite a complicated, sophisticated tool, and it was Forest Research actually that collated that hourly data and packaged it up and got iTree working in the UK. Outside of the US, there's Australia, us in the UK, and now Europe and Canada, and that's it really. China and Brazil are working on their versions too.
iTree started when? About 15 years ago in the US?
Yeah, maybe a bit before that. Originally, it was the urban forest effects model, and it was created by a chap called Dr. David Nowak, and he was working out of Syracuse in the USDA Forest Research Station there, working on this model that looked at urban trees and the benefits they provide, because he had identified this would be something that we needed to take more account of going forward. And meanwhile, on the West Coast, you had Greg McPherson, who was another forestry scientist, working on another model called Streets, which was all about carbon reduction in urban forestry and measuring the carbon reduction and carbon sequestration of urban trees. And then the two of them, rather than working in silos, got together, and then iTree was born out of that. And then out of that, because it is a collaborative initiative, I think a lot of the best stuff that comes out of anywhere is collaborative. There's some really cool models that have been invented, and they just sort of disappear without a trace. Maybe the student that created them in the university's moved on or whatever. But the great thing about iTree is because it's collaborative and it's a public-private partnership. So you've got the government agency, you've also got private tree care companies like Davy, but then you've also got the NGO or third sector organisations like Arbor Day Foundation and the International Society of Arboriculture working on it as well. It's had well over $10 million of investment.
Brilliant.
Since it first came out. It's been iTree for just over 10 years, because in 2019 they had their 10-year anniversary.
So tell us about the suite of programs that are available at the moment and what they all do. What's the difference between them?
iTree Eco is very bottom-up approach. You need to get people on the ground, and you need to get them to measure the trees and visit those trees and collect information on their structure, their heights, crown widths, crown condition, the species, of course. iTree Canopy is much quicker and easier to do. It's top down, and you can do it using Google Earth imagery on a computer. And, in an afternoon, you could probably do a whole city, but it doesn't give you quite as much information. It doesn't give you that detail on tree species. It doesn't give you information on the sizes of those trees. It just gives you an idea of what canopy cover there is over an area. And we're really chuffed because last year we worked with the Woodland Trust, who funded some work, and iTree Canopy can now estimate ecosystem services as well. So it can't tell you the species and structure, but based on all the iTree studies that have been done in the UK now, because we've reached a stage where there's been upwards of like 30 studies of a large scale and countless others of a smaller scale, all that metadata has been used to get estimates of the benefits provided by trees just by looking at where the location is and how much tree canopy cover you have.
That is really exciting, because I was going to ask you about the iTree Canopy looking down. How does that differentiate between a tree canopy and a shrub canopy, and does it matter?
Yes, it does matter. And it works on Google imagery. So, as you know, some places we have really good imagery for, like London. But there are other places like the Southwest, for instance, where the imagery isn't updated quite so often. So that's a limitation. It depends how old your imagery is. And as we know, the urban fabric changes a lot on a daily basis. Yeah, so that's an important consideration.
And people can download these studies for free, can't they, from your website, Treeconomics?
Yeah, we've got a resources page that's got all the reports on. I mean, that's one of the good key things about iTree as well, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that, not only is it peer reviewed, it's also free to use.
Yes.
And it's open source, so anybody can use it.
It is really good. If you've got certain field data and you correlate that field data into a certain tabular format that iTree reads, a program reads, you can input it. I mean, I had quite detailed data of a large housing estate, and then it churns out the iTree Eco data for you and the canopy cover. which was really, really interesting. And I really recommend, listeners, that you go to the website, which we're going to put a link on our website, and just have a look at the detail in these reports. Let's take the London study, which is one of the biggest in the UK, and presumably it still is the biggest, is it? The biggest in terms of area?
It's the biggest by area, but it might not be the biggest if you look at number of plots anymore, or how many volunteers were engaged. When it was carried out, it was the biggest.
Were there any surprises in the results? Like, what was the most prevalent species?
Off the top of my head, I can't quite remember. I do remember that apple was in the top 3, and that was a bit of a shock to some. They were saying, well, this can't be depended on, because we know it's, one of the bigger species, like London plane is very common. That's going to be one of the commonest species. It can't be apple. I was a bit worried. And then I went away and I found a Royal Horticultural Society had done a survey some years before. And also Trees in Towns too had picked up that there was quite a lot of apple. And so this Royal Horticultural Society report as well. So that justified that finding. But as it turned out, of course, it's about perceptions. And so a lot of the tree officers were very familiar with seeing London planes every day. They're big trees, they're substantial, and you can't help but notice them. Whereas the modest apples were all located behind walls or in people's gardens. And so because this urban forest is public and private, it managed to pick up something which before was sort of unseen, that there were so many apple trees. The other thing which iTree does as well, because it essentially measures these tree benefits, but it also measures the disbenefits as well.
Oh, yes, that's right, because we're so keen to talk about how great trees are, but of course they do cause problems as well. So tell us about the disbenefits that iTree finds.
It makes sure those are taken account of in its calculations, but the overall effect we found, our one study, is positive. So, for example, trees emit volatile organic compounds, and they're things that can irritate our chest and cardiovascular system. iTree takes that into account because although trees remove pollution, they also create these BVOCs, biogenic volatile organic compounds, and things like willow and oak produce quite a lot of these. London plane at certain times of year, there's hairs that it puts out from its seed pods that can irritate. Pollen from birch can give you hay fever. When we report on the benefit figures, that's all been taken into account, the disbenefits as well. That's really good that that's done.
Yes, it's really honest and true.
And of course, the overall effect of trees, so that there could be localized problems because it's all very scale specific, I guess. So if you're in a street with lots of willows, you might experience localized issues, but the overall cooling effect of the urban forest mitigates for that, because it's only when we get our peak summer temperatures that the pollution gets worse. And I'm probably oversimplifying it here, but at higher temperatures, the gases become more, not fluid, but...
Do they hang around more?
It's when ozone's created at higher temperatures, yeah, and it's more of an issue. And so when you think that an urban forest can cool an area and around 7 degrees Celsius on a peak summer day, then it really is doing something important. During the Paris heat wave in 2003, 14,000 people died.
Did they?
Yeah, and I read that in the newspaper and I had to check it because I thought that seems a bit high.
Gosh.
Just makes you realise, how serious this the whole temperature and climate change issue could be in the future.
So we've got the suites of iTree Eco, iTree Canopy. Tell us about iTree Streets.
iTree Streets is what they call a legacy tool. So it's been fully integrated into iTree Eco and as such has reached its sort of dead end. So they still supply that tool, but it's what they call a legacy tool. There's iTree Canopy is the one we've unlocked with Woodland Trust. And so we've got a fully operational iTree Eco and iTree Canopy now as well. And the next one to focus attention on, I think, really is iTree Design. And we've done some work with Kia and Highways England on this in developing bespoke tools with the US iTree team. So completely new tools tailored for Highways England. I'm hopeful that in a couple of years, if not sooner, we should have the open source versions of iTree design as well as some more sophisticated stuff. And iTree design works by allowing you to forecast tree benefits into the future and look at different planting scenarios to tell you what you're going to plant and what will the benefits be. With Highways England, what we've done is match that to a cost-benefit analysis and benefits foregone from the impacts of whatever it is they're designing, be that a flyover or a slipway or a tunnel, and they can draw that on the fly on the programme. It will calculate the square metres and the benefits foregone, depending on the habitat types. And then when they put in what they're going to plant back, it will give them, well, this is what you've taken out. This is what you're going to put back. It's going to take this long to grow and deliver this many benefits. It will break even in year 20 or year 30, or maybe never, in which case, right, back to the drawing board. We need to plant more trees, essentially. And I think that's been a really useful tool because I think a lot of people underestimate how many trees you need to replace existing mature trees.
I've got so much I want to say on that because, as you and the listeners know, I mainly work in the development industry, and this is really dynamite. What used to happen in the past was that in terms of developing a site, the local authority would look at, okay, one tree's being lost, one tree's being replaced, that's okay. We know now what we already intuitively knew, that one new tree does not equal one old tree. I won't even insult the listeners why. But what iDesign does, it can calculate if you have year equivalents, let's say year 3 or year 10 or year 20 equivalents, how many new trees would need to be planted. But it's actually more subtle than that because you're looking at what species of trees have been lost and what species of trees would be planted. I know that you're in development. We're putting this model forward to help the development industry. And you and I have been working together on some projects that I'm working on. I'm really excited about this. And I wonder how this might move forward. Is it about money?
Yes, yeah, but part of it is about money because we haven't got $10 million US, and it's taken us it took us 5 years together with Forest Research and others to get iTree Eco unlocked, and that was done on the back of the London project essentially, and then I wanted to focus on iTree Canopy. What's great about that is obviously the Woodland Trust we worked with funded that essentially, and we're going to do workshops on that aimed very much at members of the public because it's something graspable. iTree Eco is quite complex. It can take a while to get your head around it, whereas iTree Canopy you can do in a morning. iTree Design is the next thing to set our sights on, really. But key to all this, I suppose, because of that funding issue, is collaboration and time. All of our projects have been collaborative because with less, you can do more. Now is the time because everything seems to be in alignment. Things like the kickback on HS2 and the Greta Thunberg effect and the reliance of green space due to COVID. All these things, it's like a perfect storm, isn't it?
If you're listening to this podcast and you work in the development industry as an arboricultural consultant, let's get together and work with Treeconomics to help deliver this iDesign so that we can benefit. Because I think it makes a difference on what can we realistically retain, what can we realistically plant, making sure there's effective budgets for that new planting and its maintenance. I can tell you now in my daily work, it makes a massive difference when you're on a building site and the builder says to you, I know we've got permission to do this work and we're going to keep this tree, but really it's such a problem. And I say to them, look, you've got to find a way around it because all the calculations have been done for canopy and ecosystem services. And if you take that tree out, it has an exponential effect on how many more trees you need to plant, and you haven't got room to do that. So it's a really powerful management tool when you've got your boots on and you're in the site trying to take care of that tree population. So I think it's absolutely brilliant, Kenton.
Yeah, I think that it's good to have tools that give you evidence and figures that you can use. It's kind of things a lot of us have known all along, but to actually give hard facts and figures is is better, because the people we're discussing these kind of things with, that's what they need to make their decisions. And they haven't had that in the past. They've only had the costs associated with trees. That's all they've been able to see. And to make some of these benefits or ecosystem services or public goods, as they're now being called, sort of visible, really helps win cases for funding and arguments for more tree planting, or maybe even more importantly, maintaining what we already have.
Yes, that's a big thing, isn't it? It's so easy to walk away. And talking about making things visible, one of the new initiatives you've been working on are tree tags.
It's something Keith and I have been talking about for a little while, actually. And so essentially what we've done is a tree tag that exists as a PDF. And for all the trees in the Barcham's catalogue, we ran those through iTree and projected them forward for their lifetime up to 300 years, because a lot of trees will live a lot longer than that. But we had to draw the line somewhere. And we rated all the carbon storage of the trees.
Oh, yeah.
And put it in a format. It's the EPC format, the Energy Performance Certificate. So it's something that, if you're going onto the nursery or buying trees, you'll instantly recognise what it's trying to tell you, which is how good is this tree at storing carbon. And of course, trees are worth more than just carbon, of course.
It's become such a sensitive issue because a lot of local authorities are writing their net carbon zero date, such as 2030, and it's become something that the general public have really latched onto, and politicians have latched onto as something that has become the most important thing in their minds. I mean, we know that trees have multiple benefits. It's much more subtle than that, but carbon is becoming something that people go, right, that's what I talk about, so that I know that I'm knowledgeable and that we can hold people to account on carbon. I say it's always a much bigger picture, but I think actually that's such a great idea to have those benefits projected forward on the Barcham's Nursery products. Is there anything to do with tree tags on existing trees? Because sometimes you see on social media, people have put, this tree is doing all of this good for you. Tell us about some projects like that you've seen.
We've done a few of those tags ourselves. So a good example was in Ealing, and we worked with Trees for Cities, and we put tree tags on select number of trees, and the tree was sort of introducing itself on the tree tag. It's like, hello, I'm an London plane tree, or I'm a cherry tree, and did you know I'm doing XYZ? And then take your photograph with me and use the QR code, and you could win a prize, essentially.
How brilliant.
I think it's a great engagement tool because, of course, all this data that's being collected, it's no good being left as data. I mean, it's great for scientists and people who work with data and, quite high level stuff. And I guess that's where we come in, because although all the tools are free, what we've found we're helping people to do is to turn that data into information and to tailor that to the different audiences. If you need community engagement, you need to use a whole different raft of engagement methods and messaging than if you're trying to win political support, or if you're trying to talk to the developers, or if you're going for some sort of funding. So it's different for each one. So I think that's really key as well to the whole iTree thing is providing the evidence based on data that you can turn into information, hopefully will then turn into action on the ground to get or to assist those managing trees get to where they want to be.
And finally, Kenton, what's your dream scenario?
That's a really good question.
That's why we ask it every interview.
I tell you what, I show a slide at the end of a lot of my talks, and it's actually a bit of street art from a Polish Banksy, I suppose, called Natalia Rak. It's of a young girl with a watering can on the side of a house, and she's watering a real tree that's there. But this is huge. It's like 40 feet high. This image, and it reminds me about leaving a legacy. And I appreciate so many of the trees that the Victorians and Edwardians and all these old plant hunters brought back. and they're just fantastic. It's great that they did that because we've got a huge genetic resource in this country, and they've been here a long time, and that's going to be great looking at future climate. We probably already know, a lot of the tree species that are going to perform well going forwards in these botanical gardens, but I'm starting to digress again.
No, that's really interesting. It's such a good point, because what you're saying is there is a legacy of non-native planting that's 100, 150 years old, and we can see how it's performed, and it gives us an indication of whether or not those trees are suitable for planting in a future climate. So no, it's a really, really good point, Kenton. So interesting, a real whistle-stop tour of the suite of tools for iTree and a great dream scenario. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharon. It's been my pleasure as well.
Tree Lady Talk.
Victoria Tate and Danny Hill.
I'm one of the urban forest consultants at Treeconomics, and I joined the company in 2019. I work on a whole range of projects, from canopy surveys to very bespoke projects for clients. But on the whole, I tend to work a lot with our eco-sample city surveys, so the larger city scale projects. And these are really fantastic projects because it involves working with lots of different people. It often involves working with volunteers, members of the community. And it's a whole year-long project, so there's quite a lot that comes into it, and I really enjoy those. So,
welcome to Victoria Tate. Victoria, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hi, so I am a lecturer practitioner in education for sustainability at Anglia Ruskin University. Although when I first got involved in this project, I was actually had a slightly different role, so I was education for sustainability coordinator. But in both roles, basically what I try to do is engage students both through the formal curriculum, but also through the informal curriculum, in opportunities to find out more about sustainability, to act in a sustainable way, to engage with our, with people in the local, our local cities. So we're in Peterborough, Chelmsford and Cambridge. Just to make sure that we're really preparing our students for the future.
And the reason why we're talking to both of you today is because of the Cambridge iTree project. Danny, tell us what it's about.
this is a really exciting project, and one of the reasons that we really wanted to talk about Cambridge is because we kind of feel that the way it's gone is quite relatable to probably a lot of people's over the last year, and it's also a really interesting one. So we launched the project back in January 2020, and it's a jointly run project with Treeconomics and Forest Research. So we're all working on it together. The Cambridge city is built around the banks of the River Cam to the northeast of London, and it's got, you know, obviously a well-known history of being a very successful city with a world-class reputation for education and research, and it also lies in a beautifully historic environment. So it's a fantastic place to be running an iTree case study. So we were quite excited from the get-go.
Wonderful. I absolutely love Cambridge. It's a fantastic city.
Yeah, it's really lovely. And we did manage to visit once. So Cambridge as a city has already got a really successful canopy project, which is looking to increase canopy cover and improve their resilience to climate change. And what we've done with this project is still looking at the trees in Cambridge, but from a slightly different angle. So whereas canopy is looking at the trees from above, our project is very much focused from the ground up. So it's actually surveying the trees that are there and looking at them in terms of their species and size and things like that. And this study will stand complementarily alongside the canopy project and be used for lots of different policies. And in terms of where this study was aiming to go, there are a few really key aims that were identified by Cambridge City Council at the beginning, and I thought I would maybe run through those.
That would be really helpful. I mean, what did they want to know?
One of the really key things was to understand a bit more about the structure of their urban forest. So they already knew about how much canopy they had, they knew the proportions and where it was, but they wanted to understand a little bit more about their species composition, the diversity, and also the tree condition. And one of the things that we're able to do alongside that in iTree Eco, which is one of the other key aims, is be able to study ecosystem services and actually calculate those values and quantify them. So that was a really key part. But aside from all those environmental aspects, One thing that Cambridge really wanted to do was to promote their urban forest and emphasise the benefits, but also to engage and train volunteers in data collection and field work, and sort of look more at things like land use and the sort of impact of pests and diseases, and really try and use evidence to support their policies and strategies moving forward.
Excellent. It's so good to have an evidence-based approach for all the pressures we've got on our urban forest. Victoria, tell me about your involvement.
So I actually was involved both as a volunteer and as a coordinator for student volunteers. So in my role at Anglia Ruskin, I'd already been involved in a number of initiatives that involved kind of connecting students up with opportunities around trees. And this included things like organising a mass tree planting day in partnership with Chelmsford City Council, and also arranging the creation of an orchard in a local secondary school in Cambridge. And it was kind of through this work that I'd already been doing that I came across Matt, who is the Senior Arboricultural Officer at Cambridge City Council. And Matt told me about the Cambridge Canopy Project and plans for the iTree Eco Project. And I just thought it sounded great and that it sounded like a really fantastic opportunity for our students to be involved in. So I started reaching out to a couple of my colleagues, and one in particular, Julia Mackenzie, who is a technician in our School of Life Sciences. She was already doing research on trees and biodiversity in Cambridge, so was a really natural fit for the project. And the two of us, we went to City Hall to meet with Matt, and it kind of sort of developed from that point.
So you had to recruit lots of volunteer students.
Yeah, we did. Although obviously COVID hit, so the plans that we had originally for the project didn't quite come into fruition.
So Danny, I mean, here we are. You've set up this brilliant project. You've got lots of keen volunteers, and then we're all told to stay at home and save lives and save our NHS. What happened next?
I can remember the sort of really key moments so clearly. I think it was the first week in March, so we were going to have our first setup meeting. So, you know, I set off on the train. It was about a 5-hour journey to get to Cambridge, off ready to meet up with the Cambridge City Council members, and Victoria was coming along, and so were our forest research colleagues. And there was a little note on my agenda to make sure that I mentioned this coronavirus, which sort of was at the time was in the news, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. And
so was this February 2020, or?
I think it was between sort of end of Feb, beginning of March. It was just before we kind of really knew what was going on. It was starting to be talked about, and you were kind of hearing it, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. And we just sort of said, you know, we'll monitor it and we'll see what happens. And I think it was about a week later that the whole country just went into national lockdown.
Yes.
At the moment of thinking, okay, so yeah, it does have quite a big impact on the project. And especially because all of the project is based on collecting field data around Cambridge. And at that time, you couldn't even work outside. It wasn't possible.
It was a really terrifying time, wasn't it? And so strange. We almost couldn't process it. And there was that few weeks, really, that nobody worked outside at all.
And I remember having sort of the very first conversation with Forest Research in Cambridge. And we basically said, look, we've got two options. We either postpone it until 2021, or we completely overhaul the whole methodology, which has been used for many other projects. But in terms of getting that field data, we thought the only way we're going to be able to do it this year is by completely changing it. And we must have been feeling quite brave that day, because that's the option that we took.
Yeah.
Actually, there are so many positives that came from it. So, I mean, the first thing that we had to do is it wasn't going to be possible to train or recruit volunteers from, you know, the wider community, because it just wouldn't have been safe, and we wouldn't have been able to run training in person.
Yeah.
So it really meant that we kind of had to rely on those collaborations, such as with Victoria's students. And the first thing that we did is we looked at the number of plots that would actually be within residential properties, you know, around their homes, and realised there was quite a huge opportunity to be able to engage members of the local community in surveying their own plots in their gardens. So we completely adapted the methodology so that people didn't need any equipment. We made a video, a manual. We kind of made everything that we could to replicate what you would normally get in a training session, and sent these printed materials to those people's homes. So we sent them directly to their letterbox, through their letterbox, in the hope they would complete them. And I think we all just sat there, you know, with our fingers crossed, hoping that people would get back to us and would be able to complete the surveys. And I'm really pleased that they did.
Well, Danny, you sent that to XXX households. How many households actually got back to you roughly?
The main thing was, it kind of wasn't really about the numbers. It was actually about being able to engage with people. And it was the very first time we'd ever done it. So I think for all of us, it was a huge sort of first trial. And I don't think it will be the last. I think it will be something that will happen time and time again. But it was a completely new and a completely innovative approach. And I think, you know, there were lots of things that were at play. You know, we thought possibly we might have more chance people could, you know, carrying out the surveys in their gardens because they're all at home. But actually, on the flip side of that, people were trying to manage homeschooling and work, many things. So it would be really interesting to try this again in a more sort of normal climate. But it was a fantastic way of completely changing the survey and being able to tell people about it and try to engage them. And I think that's one of the things that I think is really lovely about this project, is that everyone feels so positively.
Also, you haven't got people travelling to site, have you? So you've kept your carbon footprint down really small. And as you say, you know, had good engagement. Perhaps people have thought about the trees in their garden in a new way.
You know, in doing this approach, we managed to do the study in the study year rather than delaying it. I mean, even if we delayed until this year, 2021, we likely would have still had quite a lot of things to overcome. But it's great that we were still able to do it, and it really is a story like no other. You know, there'll never be another Cambridge, really. And you know, it meant we were able to train some members of the community and provide opportunities for some people who probably wouldn't have engaged otherwise. You know, this could be any household. It could be people who are interested in the project, but it could be someone completely new. So it's a really nice engagement opportunity. And then students from ARU received training and made really fantastic contributions to the project.
Victoria, tell me about the students. I mean, they were going for a really hard time. I guess you had students who, you know, had left home to go to university, and now they're locked down in their respective flats and student accommodation. So there's a lot of suffering there, actually.
Yeah, I think it's been a really tough year for everyone, but especially for students. And I think when COVID hit, from our perspective, so at that point, there were sort of 3 staff members involved in the project. And I think we really did think this was it. This was the end of the line for us. So we had kind of started making some preliminary steps to get students involved, but they'd been very basic. And we'd really just had that one meeting with Danny and with Forest Research and the council. So it was, you know, it was a really exciting new thing. And then all of a sudden, we're all stuck inside our houses. We can't do anything. And at that point, so for us, the university had sent home all of the students, or they were stuck in their university accommodation, as you said. The courses were going to be delivered online for the remainder of the term. And so there was definitely a time when I just could not see how we were going to be able to be involved in the project. And I think especially then our time frame for the project was that we wanted to have it completed by the end of June. So it really seemed quite impossible. And I remember sitting at home actually one afternoon and having this agonizing time trying to decide what I was going to write to the project partners, because I just felt terrible that, you know, they were relying on us and we were going to let them think we couldn't be part of the project anymore. But then, as Danny said, I kind of had a meeting where we started to think about alternative ways of how we might actually be able to run the project. And it was suggested that instead of the original number of 20 students, which is what we'd been hoping for, and we'd originally planned for 20 students to be involved, we were instead going to involve a much smaller group. So we were thinking around 6 to 7 students. And we were going to ask them to only survey land that was publicly accessible. So we'd already started to do a bit of work to recruit students, and we had 10 students come back to us and say, yeah, we're interested in this. So we got in touch with those 10 students and just said, look, when things start to open up a little bit, would you be interested in being involved in this? And we were really fortunate. We got 7 positive responses back. So it's kind of at that point that I actually became a volunteer myself. So this was firstly through helping Forest Research and Treeconomics to trial the amazing homeowners manual that they were coming up with. And also I went through the training process as well with Forest Research and Cambridge City Council. So we did training in 2 ways. So the first one was online delivery, and then we also managed to do an in-person training with Cambridge City Council. And so I agreed to get involved, I think initially to do 5 plots, but I did also say that I would help to sort of mop up additional plots from students who weren't able to get out and finish them themselves.
Wow. And did the students enjoy it? Was it a release for them?
Honestly, yeah, the feedback that we had on the whole was really, really positive. And I've got a couple of quotes here from students that I thought I could just share if that's okay. Yeah, so the first one is from a student called Tiana. She was one of our very enthusiastic volunteers. And she said that participating in the iTree Eco project gave her the opportunity to learn whilst doing what she loves, which is conserving the environment. She said that now she walks down a street conscious of her environment with an exciting feeling of being able to name the trees and educate her friends about canopy cover. And she said that overall the project gave her the knowledge, developed her skills, and opened her eyes to the fantastic world of trees.
That's really wonderful. And have you got another quote as well?
Yeah, so I've got another quote here from a student called Kim, who was also a really enthusiastic volunteer. And she said that she found the whole experience really interesting, really educational. She said she learned new skills from measuring and identifying tree species, in addition to receiving some really great guidance on how to use new equipment in the field. And she said that she would definitely take part in a similar scheme again if the opportunity arose. So there was some really, really positive feedback from the students. And I think on the whole, what it gave them was just the opportunity to engage in something practical that was contributing to a kind of better understanding of our cities. And I think it was so important in a year when so many other events had been cancelled, when students weren't getting the same opportunities that they would usually get at university. So I think this was a really unique and special thing to still be able to offer to our students.
So Danny, how has the project progressed from then on? So you've got your data, which you didn't expect to get. And how are things now with the project?
Despite the global pandemic, we did manage to survey the trees of Cambridge. We've collected all the data, all that's completed, and we're now in the data analysis stage. So we're running it through a programme called iTree, which we use at the moment, and are starting to write up the report. So it's really exciting times, and I'm just really chuffed that we were able to complete it, even with all those restrictions in place. And in many ways, I think it really strengthened, the collaboration with ARU. We also managed to engage the Cambridge University grounds team, who collected all the plots that were on their land. It was a really, I suppose, different way of sort of communicating with the local community. And hopefully that will be a sort of ongoing trend. I'm quite excited to see what happens.
So when do you think the report will be out?
It's due to be completed in the next few months, and then it will depend on sort of when Cambridge are ready to publish that.
Well, watch this space. Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Victoria, having had this really positive experience with the students, will it change the way that you'll actually run some future courses or add some of the content into the courses that you already run?
Yeah, definitely. So we've already been having discussions. So myself and the two of my colleagues who were involved, Julia and Olivia, because Olivia is actually a senior lecturer in our biology school. So we've been discussing how we might actually incorporate further partnership working into some of our courses. And I think Matt from Cambridge City Council is really, really keen on this as well, and on kind of continuing the relationship that we've already established, which is fantastic. The only reason we haven't got further this year is, again, because of COVID. So the focus for lecturers this year has just been about how to put their course content online, basically. But I'm really, really positive that next year, the next academic year, we're going to be able to start incorporating some of this quite practical stuff into our courses, which is fantastic.
I really love that, because we have a big skill shortage in the land-based industries, and what a wonderful way to open up the eyes and minds of the students of that this is a job, and all those new skills, the practical skills as well. So congratulations on that. I'm really excited. So well done. Multiple benefits of a study showing the multiple benefits of trees. Thank you. Welcome to Matthew Tomsett. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role within the Highway Department, please?
So my name is Matt Tomsett. I'm the Senior Environment and Sustainability Manager for Kier Highways. And Kier Highways predominantly manages the highway network, both strategic highways for Highways England. So we have various Highways England contracts and manage and maintain and improve the strategic highway network across England. We also have various local authority contracts as well. We manage and maintain several local authority networks as well as the strategic highway network.
And how did you get involved with iTree?
It was back about 2012, 2013. As part of my role at the time, I was the environmental manager for the Highways England or Highways Agency Area 1 network, as it was at the time, which is basically Devon and Cornwall from Exeter down to Penzance. And I was very much aware of ecosystem services and natural capital at the time. And a colleague pointed me to the Torbay study that Treeconomics had done for Torbay Council. And after reading that study, I started thinking about how it could potentially be applied to a linear infrastructure network, such as a highway network. And then I contacted Treeconomics, and it went from there, really. We undertook the first iTree study on the Highways England or Highways Agency, as it was at the time, the network from Exeter down to Penzance. And I believe at the time it was the first time that iTree had been used on a linear network, used on a rail network or a road network or anything like that before. So it's the first time it had been done. We had that report finished in 2015, and we've been using a lot of the values that came out of that study to help inform some of our maintenance and our designs for our highway verge schemes.
And I understand that you've been using it lately with iDesign regarding where you're going to be removing some trees for highway works and actually looking at how many trees you might need to replace that and how that might influence your design.
Yeah, so that was kind of a natural progression, really, or the evolution from the original iTree studies we had done on the road verge. What we wanted to do is really start influencing the project designs that were happening on the highways. So we were working with Treeconomics and iTree in the States to create a Highways England natural capital design tool. It started off just as natural capital to measure ecosystem services, but we adapted it to incorporate biodiversity as well. So the tool actually measures some ecosystem service values and biodiversity units as well. So the tool that we've been developing is very much a design tool, and what you do is plot the footprint of your scheme. Let's say it's you're building a new bridge. You plot the footprint of that new bridge into the tool and then assign a habitat type and various other features that the tool needs to calculate both biodiversity units and the ecosystem service values. And then a feature that we've also incorporated into the tool is what we call a break-even point. So the tool will measure the ecosystem services you stand to lose as a result of building the scheme. If you have to clear a load of trees and vegetation in order to build the bridge, the footprint of the bridge, and maybe the compound for construction. So it measure the ecosystem services that you stand to lose by construction and delivering the project. And then it would, once you put your planting specification into the tool, so you input your planting specification, species and the number of trees, individual trees that you're planting, and then it would calculate ecosystem service values on day one, and then a projection off into the future, and it would calculate a break-even point, which is the year or the point at which your ecosystem service values equals what you've lost as a result of the scheme. And it may be that your break-even point is 80 years into the future, or 100 years, or possibly it doesn't break even at all, and at which point you can revisit the design of the scheme and maybe try and limit a little bit more the amount of vegetation that's coming out, or increase the planting that's going back in after the scheme to try and bring that break-even point down to an acceptable level. Maybe 10, 20, 30 years, depending on what you're after.
So using iTree has actually influenced the number of trees being removed and planted in a positive way. Sometimes it was never an issue anyway, but it has a positive effect on the ground.
Yeah, it's helping to inform the designs, I think. And certainly what iTree has helped to do with the ecosystem service values is raise awareness and kind of change mindsets really in relation to the highway verge. Traditionally with the management and maintenance of the highway network, the focus is on what we call the hard estate, the road itself, and the soft estate, what we call the highway verges, what we call the soft estate. The focus has always very, very much been on the road itself, and the soft estate has traditionally always really been seen as a bit more of a maintenance liability as opposed to an actual asset. But there is, it is an asset, it is worth something. So what iTree has helped us do is assign a financial value to that asset and help people see it as an asset as opposed to just a maintenance liability.
This sounds so positive. So the work that you're doing in Devon and Cornwall, is there any chance that might filter through to the other highway regions?
We're hoping so. Yeah, I mean, the original iTree study, as I say, it was completed back in 2015, which was the Highways England network from Exeter down to Penzance. We have just completed a second one, which goes from Exeter up to Gloucester and across towards Swanage. So that's pretty much the whole of the southwest of the strategic road network now that has had an iTree study done on it. So we've got those values. Highways England, if they wanted to, could easily undertake study for the whole of their network and get an asset value, these ecosystem service values for the whole of their network.
It's brilliant. I mean, it's one of the largest connected habitats in the country.
It is a real asset. And certainly the design tool that's in the process, we're just kind of finishing it off now. We'll be piling it in the southwest. And the aspiration for that really is for that design tool to be used across the whole of the Highways England network.
Hit the subscribe button to guarantee you don't miss an episode, and you can follow us on
Twitter at the Tree Lady 67,
Instagram Tree Lady Talks,
Facebook Sharon Hosegood Associates,
or send an email to noel@treeladytalks.co.uk.
Well, that was really interesting, wasn't it? I'm so excited about iTree, and we've been using it in our own practice, so that's great. Thanks, everybody. Hey, we're coming out of lockdown soon. It's really exciting, and we can go to the hairdressers. But you know what? I'm actually loving your shoulder-length hair. That's the problem with podcasts. You can't actually see what you look like.
Well,
It's
I don't know.
wild.
I think I might just stick it on the video bite thing. We do a video bite. We stick the video bite thing on the end, and I might just have a still picture of my hair.
And people can vote on, should Noel get his hair cut?
I think so.
Or shall he continue to grow it down Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen style?
It's kind of a blonde Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen and sort of a Bjorn Ulvaeus from ABBA. And for people who go back to the 70s, it's sort of Justin Hayward.
Yeah.
Do you remember Justin Hayward? I'm actually modelling it on Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues.
Put your picture up, the people can judge.
I mean, I was really interested when they started talking about bringing the public involved. I thought it was terribly interesting, but what I did get slightly confused about was like iCanopy, iTree. I mean, I'm going to do an app called I Do, I think, for weddings. How about that? Who do you do next week?
I've already had a brilliant chat with Robert Somerville, who's an architect and engineer who started the Barn Club. The Barn Club is a great book which is out now from all good bookstores, and it's about how an elm barn was built using volunteers, and a really great story and video of how the barn was raised.
Oh, that sounds... Are there any owls in it?
No, there are no owls in this.
There's no owls in the barn?
No owls in this barn at the moment, but it's a kind of barn that an owl would feel at home in. But there's a wonderful film, which we're going to have a link to on our website next week, with some great music.
Fantastic. Some great music.
Great music, not yours.
Oh, let's work for me.
Seriously though, it's a really interesting episode on how we can use elm trees, and really great to see people who have got no background in carpentry getting stuck in and creating something beautiful and celebrating afterwards, obviously.
Well, I need a beach shopping board, so perhaps I'll get in touch with you. You never know. And in the meantime, though, that's it for this week.
It's goodbye from him.
And goodbye from me.
But for now I'll go to sleep, dream my happy dream about another tree lady day. Oh, yeah.